a lot of the things you talked about, they're not even a consideration, like the health care and the commissary and the housing benefits and how all of that's going to impact them. They seem to be hastily made decisions. So I hope this helps people to stop and think about all the ramifications.
Right. Yeah, we didn't. I mean, there's other pieces that are there that the VA disability and the impact of somebody changing their rating in the future, because that actually can change the amount that the former spouse receives because of that disposable retired pay definition. And so there's language there that to protect them if the service member takes an action to do that, because their pay can change. You know, so it's like there's just a lot of stuff to consider. Yeah.
Get help. Hello and welcome. I am so glad you are here. Well, if you are one of the new listeners, I want to thank you for joining. And if you're one of the 48% who listen but do not subscribe or follow, please hit that follow button and share this show with those who are struggling with divorce. If you are in the military or you're married to someone who is a service member and you are considering divorce, there are very unique aspects to a military divorce that you will want to know. Listen as David Smith, a retired U.S. Air Force dental officer, certified divorce financial analyst, certified QDRO Specialist, military divorce financial specialist, and founder of Sand Oak Divorce Solutions, shares his expertise to help you avoid the landmines in divorce. This is the Silver Divorce Podcast, broadcast from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Please follow this show and share it with people you know who are facing divorce. We are proudly brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. And I'm your host, Lisa McCluskey, and now let's podcast. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the invite, and I know we've got a lot to talk about. There's lots of interesting things this morning.
Oh, we sure do. There's so many unique aspects to military divorce, although it does generally follow the same process as civilian divorce. But there are unique considerations due to the nature of military service. Some of the key differences include potential delays due to deployment, specific laws protecting service members, and there are unique rules for dividing military benefits. So I know you have spent a lot of time in this arena, and not only being a member of the service yourself, but really honing in your offering to help people. So I'm excited to help people consider the best way to get a divorce if they're either married to a military member or in the service.
Right. Yeah. You know, every divorce, every situation, of course, is unique. They've got their own nuances and so forth. And there's lots of twists and turns in everyone's lives. And so, yeah, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle when it comes to military divorce for people to understand and be educated about and understand all of their options.
Well, before we dive in, we want to get to know you a little bit. Just give us a little bit of your background, if you would.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting from the standpoint of I grew up in South Alabama, and very early on, I felt in high school I wanted to be a dentist. And there's only one dental school in Alabama, and so UAB. And so I started going to a small college, and the people at UAB said, you need to go to a bigger school. Well, that bigger school turned out to be Troy State University. Not that much bigger, but definitely a 4-year school. So I show up and I'm thinking, well, what happens if I don't get in dental school? What's my plan B? And I found out that there was an Air Force ROTC detachment or program there. And I said, great. If I don't get the dental, school part, I can go in the Air Force. So I also found out about a unique or very special scholarship program, Air Force ROTC scholarship program, health professions. I applied and I actually won one of those spots. So that kind of set me off to my military career because I already knew as long as I got in dental school, everything was paid for. And I had an 8-year commitment to the service. So anyway, I completed school and started the military. Went off to Japan at first and spent some time in California, the Portuguese Azores, Georgia, Germany, and on to Northwest Florida, where my wife and I lived for about 25 years almost. And then we moved to Chattanooga here recently, just in the last few months. So that's sort of a little bit of background of what got me to my military career. But there was always a part of me that wanted to get into personal finance, and I was figuring out how to make that transition after the military. And that came from a friend of mine in church who was leaving a local firm. He found out I was interested. I applied and got hired. So I stayed with them for a few years and then moved to an independent position, and I've been in that position for about 12 years now. The divorce-specific part of my business started around 2015, and so I've been doing that sort of as a separate financial planning business since then.
Oh, so what piqued your interest to hone in on divorce?
That's an interesting story there, too, because that has to do with my own family. I had a lot of experiences with divorce as I was growing up. Specifically, my parents divorced each other, obviously, remarried each other, divorced again.
Oh.
My mom remarried and got divorced. My sister married twice, divorced both times. I had one child from one of those marriages, so I had one niece. And then even myself, I got married about 6 weeks before I started dental school. And within 2 years, I was divorced. And then, but my current wife of 42 plus years, we actually met on a weekend trip to Panama City Beach for spring break.
Oh, okay.
And so we've been together for quite a while, going around the world with each other.
Yeah, that's great. So, it seems as though it's really common for men when they go into the military to marry pretty quickly. I have a daughter who was married to a Marine for a short while, and that's just what my observation was in seeing his fellow Marines, is they tended to marry pretty quickly as they were entering the military. Right,
and when I was in Panama City and I was making this transition to my independent business, I don't know what it was. It was just an increased awareness to me about divorces that were happening around me. So I actually made phone calls to county clerk's offices and started asking about statistics of the number of divorces. And there were thousands of them that were going on, many of them without attorneys. And Panama City was pretty high on the list as far as the rate of divorce in the state of Florida as well as the United States. And so I said, how can I put my military knowledge, my financial knowledge, and be able to help folks better through this process? And so that's when I reached out and found the Institute for Divorce Financial Analyst. That's the organization that provides or does the education for the CDFA designation. And so I got that in 2015. And so that was kind of where that all started.
It's interesting. Florida is still one of the leading states for the nut percent of divorces, and it is one of the leading states of where people listen to this podcast is Florida.
Great.
So, well, let's talk about how military divorces are different from your civilian divorce, if you will.
Sure. There are lots of different ways. I'll try to kind of summarize them, but just give us examples. For example, you have active duty members. You can have reserve members, reserve component members. You can have one or both of the members serving on active duty. You have all different kinds of things when it comes into play as to different kinds of divorces. In other words, or different times of retirement. You have folks that have 20-year regular military retirements. You have reserve divorces. When do they start collecting their pay or not? You have all the different components of benefits that military members have that civilian or non-military members don't, and figuring out how folks qualify for those. You have federal rules that come into play. You have in combination with state rules that come into play as to how they qualify, when they can receive benefits, et cetera. So there are lots of things like that, additional things, thrift savings plan, which is the military equivalent of a 401k. Many times someone will have a uniform services account for the military, but then in many situations someone will move to a federal government position, and then they have a civilian thrift savings plan account. And then there may be a FERS, or a federal employee retirement system pension, that comes into play. And you can hear already a lot of what I'm saying, this acronyms, this military speak. There's a lot of that's in the background that people need to understand about as well.
Sounds very complex. There are many nuances, and I know we're going to dive into some of those nuances and, and help people understand it. With all of that into consideration, is it more difficult to get a divorce in the military? Does it take longer, or is it pretty similar in terms of a process?
Right. The process itself, I would say, in general, is similar, but the unique aspects of it, of course, are that deployments come into play, where people our military service members are away, overseas or whatever. So that certainly impacts communications and the ability for the service member to have representation, how they can respond to, or the time they have to respond to requests and so forth that come to them. There are a couple of things, the Servicemen Civil Relief Act, I think it's from 2003, where the service member can actually request a stay or a postponement of the proceedings if they feel that they can't, reply as they need to or whatever. You have the Uniformed Services Former Spouses Protection Act, which comes into play, as well as with some of the rules as to what people qualify for. So it's not so much that the process is different, but yes, there are parts of it that can slow things down.
Some complicating factors.
Right.
I can imagine if you're deployed and you're on a carrier somewhere in the ocean, you're pretty limited in your ability to respond to a lot of the discovery requests that a normal divorce would go through.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about it too, when folks are separated from their family, their friends, they're away from all the things, a lot of things that are familiar, and they're under stress, and they could be being literally, shot at, or fired upon, and under attack, and then they've got this additional stress that comes. It's difficult for all of us, I think, to be able to make good decisions under that type of environment.
Absolutely. That's why it's important to have people to assist you, have a team around you. So let's talk about that in the instance where there is a military couple and they've moved around and maybe they're different duty stations. Most states have residency requirements. In order to file for divorce, you have to be a resident of the state for so many, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 6 months. But how does that affect people in the military? Is that, do they look at the state they're currently living in for their deployment, or is it their state of residence? How does that apply?
Right, like all of it could possibly.
All of it could possibly apply.
Well, this is where
all of the above.
Yeah, because they do have options. They do.
Yeah.
Generally, what you're saying is that for folks that are non-military, they have to meet those residency requirements for the state. But with those situations where, and this is definitely a question too that I would suggest that your listeners always contact and speak with an attorney. I didn't say that at the beginning. Obviously, I didn't make a disclaimer here. I'm not an attorney, obviously, but I'm a divorce financial professional, so none of this is particularly legal advice. But so they need to speak with an attorney on the base, but they could be looking at potentially filing where they have their what's called their domicile, like where they file taxes, et cetera,
Right.
and vote and so forth. It could be the state that they're living in or where they're assigned to. It could be a state where they've got other property. So the jurisdictional requirements and those residency domicile requirements are very critical, obviously, to figure out where to actually file to start the process.
Yeah, critical for also looking at different states most all of them have no fault, but some of them have fault, and some have no fault, but yet you can still cite marital misconduct. I know here in Tennessee, you can cite marital misconduct, and one of those, can be an affair, it can be alcoholism, it can be drug abuse. There are many reasons for that, but every state has its own requirements, so
right,
it's important
exactly
to figure that out.
Yeah, because the fault, no fault, question and how you file and so forth. Again, it's a legal question that they want to speak with an attorney about. But generally, I believe, as you said, I mean, the process is going to follow. The rules are going to be determined by the state where the divorce is actually going to be going on. Whether it's fault or no fault, that again is more legally. But the process itself will follow whatever the state is that they finally determine where it's going to be filed.
And you mentioned talking to an attorney on base. Does the military provide attorneys for service members who are going through divorce, or do they need to seek a civilian attorney?
They don't. The military attorneys, which are the on the base installation attorneys, which are part of the JAG or the Judge Advocate General's office, they can't actually represent the clients, but they can certainly consult. Couples could consult. And when I say couples, I mean both the military member as well as their spouse should be utilizing the services of the legal department. And so to find out basically what they can help them with. Now, they can certainly help them with other things like wills and powers of attorney for deployments and stuff like that, but they can't represent them. And so there's not a requirement necessarily that people actually hire a civilian attorney either, but certainly situations that you want to have them involved in reviewing documents, consulting with them, and understanding the legal aspects.
So schedule a consultation just so you're clear in terms of some of the basics and what direction that you might need to go if you're not doing an amicable divorce.
Exactly.
Getting that guidance.
Always, at least if you don't hire someone to represent you, then please consult with it. And you have to ask that question that way. Ask the offices when they contact them, the legal offices, the attorney's offices, will they act as a consulting attorney, versus actually representing them and going to court for them if it comes down to that. So make sure that they're clear on what you're wanting your attorney to do, what role they're going to play for you.
What role they're playing.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, there's some very common questions that I came across in women who have asked about military divorces. So I want to ask you those questions.
Sure.
So how does divorce impact military benefits like housing allowances, the BAH, commissary, and exchange privileges?
Sure. So let me first just say, what are a couple of the definitions of the words you just used? Because, many of the listeners, obviously, if they're associated with the military, they're going to know.
Right.
Some folks might not. But just very quickly, a commissary basically is the on-base grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
The exchange is pretty much the on-base department store, Walmart, Sam's, Target, whatever. BAH stands for Basic Allowance for Housing. So when a couple is living off base or overseas and they're not on the base in base housing, they get an additional amount that helps pay for their housing off base. And there's another part called BAS, which is Basic Allowance for Subsistence. Been around for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but that's a small amount that's paid basically for food and groceries. So going through a divorce is definitely going to cause a change to those benefits. Many times if they get divorced, then they're not going to be able to stay in base housing anymore or family housing. They may have to move to dorms or single housing and so forth. So those amounts, those numbers, which BAH and BAS, by the way, are both tax-free benefits. So those will definitely change during a
So they
divorce.
definitely need to take that into consideration when they're looking at what they're going to live on post-divorce. You have to consider what benefits are going to change from that
Exactly.
aspect as well.
Right.
So, yeah. I had someone ask, can a spouse take my GI Bill?
Yeah, it's interesting when you use the word take, because, and I emphasize the word take, because the answer, if the question is asked that way, is no, because the GI Bill benefit belongs to the service member.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a marital property asset that actually can be divided in divorce. So technically, I mean, a court can't force a service member to do anything with their GI Bill benefits, but voluntarily, the service member can do what's called a TOE, that's a transfer of entitlement
Mm-hmm.
of the GI Bill benefits to either their spouse or their children, or a combination of those. But a couple of landmines to watch out for with the transfer of entitlement. One is the transfer of entitlement cannot go to a former spouse. So if the benefit's going to be transferred, it needs to be done before the divorce is finalized. Another potential landmine is
timing.
Timing,
Yeah.
exactly. There's lots of things with military divorces that involve
They're
timing.
about timing.
Periods of time, and when does this happen, and that sort of thing. The other landmine, excuse me, is because the benefit belongs to the service member, they can revoke it at any time. So one of the things I talk to my clients about, is making sure that if we're talking or when GI Bill benefits are involved, and there's discussion, always needs to be discussion about this, as what's going to happen with it, to make sure that there's language, protective language in settlement agreements to prevent or encourage, I guess is a better way to put it, that the service member doesn't revoke the benefit. And if they do, what's going to be the action that's going to be taken?
Even more points to the importance of trying to be settlement minded and try to have an amicable process and not have it turn into an all-out War of the Roses.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I did have somebody ask me, can you be discharged from the military for cheating?
Well, actually, my understanding, again, it's a legal question,
Legal, yeah.
but from what my understanding of this is, that adultery is actually a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. So, the consequences of that, or whether someone's actually going to be convicted and discharged from the military because of that. If that happens, think about that actually from the perspective of both the service member and their spouse. Mm-hmm. Because if the service member is discharged, then there is no income. I mean, it might, temporarily be no income, or the benefits and so forth that were there or potentially there no longer exist.
You have to think about the family too.
Exactly. It's not just maybe they're upset because this happened, and I can understand that. But so my understanding again is there is a possibility that could be discharged. But what the service member needs to do is to be fully transparent with what's happening with their commander, their chain of command. It can also affect their potential security clearance.
Oh, yeah.
So those are the things that the service member needs to make sure that they're keeping out in front of the people, for the people that need to know. And then hopefully that'll kind of help, their situation. I don't know. But anyway, it's definitely something that could happen.
Very complicated again. You have to think very carefully about the future impact of something like that. Yeah.
The future, it's not just what's my situation going to be the day I get divorced, or the day after, or 3 years later, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road, which we can help illustrate and show people that in a picture or in a computer program, some software that I have can visually actually show them with a lot of assumptions, obviously, but of course, what their life could look like based on the consequences of the decisions they make.
Yeah, that's important in making the right decisions. It's not just for today, but it's for the future. It's for what are you going to live on a year from now, 2 years from now, and how will that impact your children as well?
Right. Yeah, the impact on the kids. Matter of fact, that's I have on my business card, I have a phrase that says, "Divorce your finances peacefully and preserve future relationships."
Mm-hmm.
Because the path that couples, whether military or not, take to actually do their divorce, that road they decide to go on, that's probably one of the most important decisions they're going to make. Whether it's be doing it themselves, whether it's mediation, collaboration, which I think some of your other previous guests have talked about before, or if they decide to put on the gloves and litigate and kind of want to duke it out. All of those things affect the privacy, the emotions, the financial outcome, how quickly or slowly things happen, and the potential, the relationships that they want to maintain or have with their children and their former spouse for years to come.
Yeah, 100%. I know I've said that in the past. Try to enter it with a settlement mindset. And that is one of the big lessons learned from my divorce, is that I wish it had been that way. So let's go on and talk about what is a military wife entitled to in divorce. If she's perhaps not a service member, but her husband is. And
right. So former spouses, we've talked a little bit already about the GI Bill benefits. We've talked a little bit about how the Former Spouse Protection Act comes into play and how the courts can actually decide how to divide the military pension. And I want to make sure when I say military pension that your listeners understand that it's not all of it. It's what's considered marital or community. That's where you get into the timing and the period of time that people have been married, the period of time that the service member has earned creditable service toward their divorce, and being able to calculate, which again I help people do, but what actually is up for division. Another part of that is the definition of what's divisible, because what's technically divisible is called disposable retired pay, another acronym, DRP. So that, by definition, is you take their gross pay and you subtract debts they owe to the government, any VA disability pay they're receiving, any payments for SBP, which is Survivor Benefit Program, which we can talk about here in just a few minutes. And then there's one other one. I'm drawing a blank on what that is, but there's 4 things that come off to be actually defined as disposable retired pay. That's what's actually divisible. VA disability pay is not divisible. So there's a lot of components like that. Mm-hmm. You get into qualifying for health care, those kind of benefits, and maintaining an ID card, having access to the commissary and the BX, the exchange, all those kinds of things. Those are all parts of what someone could be entitled to. And so we need to first make sure they clarify and understand their complete financial picture and what all of that we've talked about already means, and what their options are, when they can do certain things, what documents need to be filed with pay centers and various other organizations to make sure that they qualify within certain time periods they need to act or request.
I would think in going through a divorce where there are high emotions, a spouse may not even be thinking about some of those things. She may not be thinking about commissary and the supplemental pays and things like that. That's why it is important to get that level of guidance.
Right, exactly. And it's everything is not going to come out in one conversation.
No.
It's sometimes, a lot of times what I ask folks to do is to just sit down, take a piece of paper and write bullet points of a timeline of when they got married, where were they stationed, where did they work, where did their former spouse, maybe what did they do prior to the military, or have they left the military, separated, retired, where did they go to work? Have they had multiple employers? There could be all sorts of plans left behind. There could be pension plans that somebody qualifies for that they've completely forgotten. And so getting that timeline down and then working through that and building this picture of their finances today, they need to do all of that before they start negotiating or discussing how anything is going to be divided.
Yeah. So is alimony a factor? Does alimony follow the state rules, or how does that work in military?
Right. Alimony or spousal support is some states have formulas that will calculate maximum, so to speak, of what spousal support should be, dollar amount as well as when it starts or how long it lasts, and different kinds for different reasons. Again, that's where you certainly enlist the help of an attorney to help guide that, because every state is different. But that does come into play as definitely, again, it's very much dependent on the length of the marriage, contributions by the spouses, things like that, whatever the statutes are in the state.
Governed by the state that you're filing for divorce in.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
What happens then to the former spouse's health care if she's not in the military, but she's divorced someone in the military? Are there provisions for a carryover, or is she cut off after that divorce? What does happen to her health care benefits?
Well, technically, healthcare does end like the day after. I think it's literally like midnight.
Oh, really?
Well, it ends.
You are cut off.
Right. But, okay, again, under the Uniformed Services Former Spouse Protection Act, there are several rules that have to be met, or rules that could be met for someone to qualify for TRICARE or health care. I'm just going to quickly run through those. There's one called 20-20-20, and there's also a rule called 20-20-15. So what do those numbers mean? One number, 120, can be, or is the period of time that the couple was actually married. Second number is, what's the number of years of creditable service the service member has accumulated? Third number is, how much did those overlap? So 20-20-20, you have 20 or more years of marriage, 20 or more years of creditable service, and at least 20 years of overlap. So that's not something the court can order. They can't order health care. It has to fall, it does fall under these rules.
Okay.
So, excuse me, and that's another very important timing question. I've had some clients decide they want to wait to officially end the marriage so they can meet this time clock.
Yeah.
But when they do, that's like the golden goose. That's the golden egg here. Because if they qualify under 20-20-20, they receive TRICARE for life. That's medical care for life. They continue to keep an ID card, and they also have access to the BX and I keep saying BX, base exchange for Air Force, but the exchange and commissary. The other rule, 20-20-15, defined the same way, except there's only 15 years of overlap between the two. Huge difference in healthcare benefits, because under that rule, they only qualify for 1 year of transitional health care. They don't get to keep their ID card. They don't have commissary or BX privileges. Excuse me. And then if they don't meet either one of those two rules, they fall under, similar to COBRA, which some people may know, personal, employer, private employer insurance. When you leave employment, you might qualify under COBRA. But it's called the Continuing Health Benefits, CHCBC, I believe it is. Anyway, it's a continuation of the health benefits program. And they can go typically for 36 months, but there are some situations that they might be able to continue on for a long time. But there's guidelines out there. But the basic thing is they got to meet rules to qualify for the health care, and the judge can't decide it for them.
So timing, again, many of the things that you've talked about really do come down to timing.
Yep, exactly.
Got an injury that just can't wait? There's no need to delay your care. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is excited to announce that our Urgent Ortho Walk-In Clinic is now available on Saturdays at the Gun Barrel Road location. Open from 8 to noon, we're here to treat sprains, strains, fractures, and more. No appointment needed. So skip the long ER wait and get specialized orthopedic care fast. Visit us this Saturday at Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics Urgent Ortho. We're the center for expert care right when you need it. Learn more at sportmed.com.
And we talked a little bit about if a spouse is deployed, how that affects the process. And you said they could request a stay. Is there a time limit on requesting a stay if somebody's deployed and the spouse wants to file for divorce? Because deployments can be a year or longer, right?
Exactly. My reading of the, again, illegal, but this document, this Serviceman's Civil Relief Act, if I read it correctly, it says it could be as long as a person's in the military.
Oh.
Don't know that anybody's ever done that.
You could push that decision way down the road then if you really wanted to.
But yeah, I think it could be delayed for a period of time. I'm not sure that anybody would want to do that.
Unless they're very vengeful, then they...
Right, because, they're, again, deployments, they're typically not, yes, it might be 6 months, be for a year, but at some point they're going to come back. And They're going to have to face, what's actually happening and deal with it and try to make some decisions.
Yeah. And you don't want to postpone your life for that long, I wouldn't think.
No.
So you talked about 2020 and 2015. I've heard about the 10-10-10 rule in the military divorce. What is that?
Right. 10-10-10 rule. Let me tell you first what it isn't.
Okay.
That does not mean that you need to have 10 years of marriage before somebody's pension can be divided.
Okay.
There's a myth out there that a lot of people believe that that's the case. And so that's not the case. There's not a length of marriage requirement. Well, maybe there is for at least 1 year, I believe, is the minimum, to be able to receive any of the spouse's pension. But obviously, the shorter time that a couple has been married, the less pension buildup, so to speak, or, that the service member has actually qualified for. So what is the actual 10-10 rule? Again, similar to the 20-20-20 in that, but it's 10 years of marriage and 10 years of creditable service that's been accumulated or earned by the service member. And those two have happened concurrently. There's been at least 10 years of service and 10 years of marriage. What that does allow is that if the former spouse does receive or is awarded a portion of the service member's pay or pension, then they can receive that benefit payment directly from the particular pay center. Generally, it's DFAS, which is the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, for most of the services, but there's a Coast Guard pay center that's different. And so that allows direct payments. Now, what happens if they don't meet the 10-10 rule? Well, they got to figure out some other way to have those payments come to the former spouse. Does that mean, well, they could make direct payments to the spouse, but then that kind of ties everybody together for a long period of time. So I'm not sure why this rule is there or what brought it about. It seems rather arbitrary, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because they could then depend on that former spouse to continue to pay out for what they're supposed to receive. And if that former spouse is deployed or out of the country, there could be so many complicating factors to continue to receive that benefit.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any military benefits for former spouses of reservists?
Yes, there are. They're similar from the standpoint of. Well, let me talk first, just a little bit of difference between active duty and reservist. Active duty, of course, if they meet their 20 years generally, again, and they vest or they're eligible for retirement at that point in time. Like me, for example, I actually retired from the military with my 20 years when I was 46 years old. So, and I immediately started receiving my retirement pay and have been receiving it ever since. A reservist or reserve component RC service member is different in that they earn their points when they serve reserve duty and weekend drills and things like that, and they can also have some active duty time. And so they have to accumulate what's called 20 good years toward creditable service.
Okay.
So they could do that. Again, they might receive that, and there's a calculation again when they actually receive it, and they have a point statement that shows they've achieved that. But they don't technically start receiving their pay until they're 60 typically. Some people might qualify as early as 59 if they've had some deployments and things like that, particular deployments. So the benefits to the former spouses of either reserve or active duty can receive are similar, but it could be very different as to when they receive them. It's also very different timing as to when the military member or reserve component member fills out the paperwork to make elections for certain things. So military pensions are, they're under what's called a shared benefit versus a separate benefit. A shared benefit means that the former spouse can't start receiving their portion until the military member starts receiving theirs. There are some private pensions and company pensions and so forth that can fall under what's called the separate benefit, which means the former spouse or alternate payee, another term for that, they could start receiving their benefit at like this employee's earliest retirement age, even if the employee hasn't started receiving theirs yet.
Oh, okay.
So that's another thing about discovering differences in plans, not specifically just military, but retirement plans for businesses or at employers all of them have different rules. So that's something to know.
And there are people who serve in the military from active duty, and then they are out and they become reservists. So you would have a multitude of possibilities for plans in that instance. If you were married, our audiences, they're typically, have been married for decades, maybe 20, 30 or more years. It could be there's several things that they would need to be looking at.
Right. There could be defined benefit, plans, pension plans that could be that the employee or the service member has qualified for, but again, they won't receive them until the future. Another part about specifically on splitting the benefit of a military pension, there's a document that's called the Military Retirement Pay Division Order, MRPDO. Again, here we go, another one. I help people actually create those and draft those because that document is what is sent to their respective pay center to basically direct them to say, this is what the court says you need to do with this pay. Mm-hmm. And so there are, so that gets filed along with many other documents. And usually DFAS or other pay centers have 90 days to process all this because they notify the service member and say, hey, do you contest this at all? I think they give them 30 days to do that, et cetera. So, but then making sure that that document is processed and accepted by the pay center, then the payments to the former spouse will start.
Okay.
If that's assuming that the service member is already receiving theirs.
It's so complicated. So if I'm if we're a military couple and we're considering divorce, what's your advice? What's the first thing I should do?
The first thing you should do is, it's a really good question, but what I suggest is for folks just to begin gathering information. Just really be aware. They're not like opening someone else's mail, or they're not logging in under someone else's social security number and doing those kinds of things. But if things show up at the house or whatever, or where they're living, start making copies of things, and just start writing down accounts and account numbers and rough balances and maybe when those accounts were opened, because they're going to need to know, generally, it's always going to need to know what was accumulated during the marriage and what was not. Another thing to note is just because an IRA or a bank account, for example, has one person's name on it, that does not mean that it's not divisible. So begin to do those kinds of things, just increase their awareness. But also, too, some other things they can consider is And also, communicate with an attorney about this, but you want to make sure that you're not changing a lot of stuff, because that might not be looked at very well by the courts later on. But start making sure that you have adequate cash, some liquid money. If you don't have a credit card in your own name, maybe perhaps you want to start one yourself and start working on your own credit. So those are some things that basically some people would do. Emotionally, I would hope that they've tried to, I don't promote divorce. I mean, I certainly work in this area, obviously, but it's not something that I wish upon anyone. But if it's going to happen, use the resources of talking with a therapist or a counselor, either by yourself or with your spouse, and work as hard as you can to reconcile if at all possible. Don't give up. Don't give up. Try to hang in there. But if it's coming, start doing some of those other things I mentioned. And reach, again, just consult with an attorney early on and find out how it works in your state. The jurisdiction question would need to be answered. But also, I'm happy to talk with someone about it. I offer free 30-minute consultations over the phone or virtually. And I don't ask folks to make a decision whether they want to hire me or not then. It's find out where they are, find out really what's most important to them, what's on their mind, and hopefully answer some questions for them. And if I'm not the person to help them, then hopefully I will try to point them to some different resources.
Well, from everything that you've discussed today, the one takeaway I have is it's very complex. And if you don't seek help, get guidance, there are many things that you could be leaving on the table as you work through your divorce process. And
right.
You don't know what you don't know until you talk to somebody.
Exactly. It's like we didn't talk a lot of detail about this, but I do want to make sure that I mention this because I've used the acronym SBP, Survivor Benefit Plan, several times, excuse me. Very quickly, what that means is if a former spouse is awarded that, or let me rephrase that, if the military spouse is told they either have to elect it if they haven't elected it yet, or if they elected it at retirement, they need to continue it and keep their spouse in that chair, so to speak, as the beneficiary. What that means is, in the future, if the service member passes away, then the former spouse could receive 55% of their pay. And so a couple of landmines about that is that only one former spouse can be in the chair as a beneficiary. So if there was, and I didn't say this before, but I mean, I've listened to several of your podcasts too, and they've all been great. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank
I usually
you.
take morning walks and I listen to lots of different podcasts, and yours is one of them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But so if someone's been married before and military member, been married before and divorced, and they've already named someone as a former spouse beneficiary, second person coming along can't bump them out of the chair.
Oh, can they change it?
Only if the previous one agrees to not be named. But why would they do that?
Why would they do that?
Yeah,
There are a whole lot of people that don't know this.
Yeah, so so that's one landmine, is the one person. The other is typically if the former spouse that's named remarries before age 55, they suspend their eligibility for the program. I did have a situation where a couple, second marriage, and they were getting divorced again, Coast Guard member actually, and he named his first spouse as SBP beneficiary. She remarried and was still married at the time of his second divorce. So what that means is she technically is not eligible as long as she's married, but neither is the second soon-to-be former spouse, because the first one is still there, even though she's not eligible.
That could be a huge surprise to somebody.
Yeah, that's why I always recommend or ask, is this, how many, as you know, you've talked about statistically, first,
Right.
second, third divorces. If there's been multiple, we need to get some first documents and look and see what's already happened. But you can also typically tell that from pay statements too.
Mm-hmm.
Coast Guard was interesting because they use some even different terminology. So that was the first Coast Guard one for me.
Wow. So much to take into consideration. So I'm glad you're here to help us walk through that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, in your years of working with all the couples that you've worked with, is there a story that particularly moved you, that really spoke to you that I am where I need to be?
Yeah, it was actually the very first client that I worked with. It wasn't actually a military client at that time, but she got introduced to me, and and been working together for a while, accumulating all her documents, the discovery process that you've described before in previous podcast, and got everything organized for her. And we were actually in quite a long mediation session. And so I had my computer with me, and I didn't put all this data. And in this particular situation, there was a commercial property involved. So she was trying to decide whether to keep that property or not as part of the divorce. And so when I showed her the visual picture of what her life was to look like if she did or if she didn't, she said, she literally pointed her finger to the screen and said, "I'm doing that, and this is why." And so it reinforced the fact, even though it was very early on in my divorce business, the importance of people having information.
Yeah,
to be able to make good decisions.
You provided clarity. Without that information, she might have made the wrong decision.
Exactly, and there are situations where, well, this always happens. One spouse is more ready for this than the other, and someone's kind of trying to move things along, and the other's going, "Oh my gosh, I just found out about this. This has dropped on me, in the last week, and
Yes.
Now what am I going to do? I don't know where to take the first step. I don't know what to do.
Right.
I don't understand all this. I wasn't managing the finances during during our marriage." And so making it on a level ground for everyone to have the same information, just like dividing retirement accounts, I can help people get that information early and try to share it to everybody. I mean, that's both parties and both attorneys, if there are, to make sure that everyone knows. I've seen situations where I've been brought in after the fact, after the settlement agreement and the final judgment's been signed, and then I've been asked to create these documents I mentioned to split retirement accounts. And I'm reading the settlement agreement, and I'm going, there's not enough information for me to truly understand what you guys want me to create a document that spells out your intent, when your intent is not adequately spelled out in your agreement, at least in my feelings.
Yeah, it's hard then to enforce an agreement when it's not very explicit.
Yeah. That language, again, when it comes to mortgage refinancing, various things like that, I mean, there's a lot of language that in my profession, or my previous profession as a dentist, I've told people this, I worked in millimeters. I mean,
right, yes.
And so detail for me is extremely important. It's kind of like being, I don't know, you probably remember this TV show, Columbo.
Oh, yes.
Maybe many of your listeners do too. And how he would, make a face, and he's walking around and he's asking questions and trying to find out information. That's kind of the way I feel I am. I mean, I'm a detective, I'm trying to help folks find this information. And I do, again, not encouraging divorce, but being as complete and as detailed as I can be.
Mm-hmm. Details matter.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I always ask people this question: what book's on your bedside table?
I was thinking about A few weeks ago, my wife and I took a trip. We were on a trip to Canada. I think we're in Quebec City. And we walked into this really nice bookstore. You know, you've been in those bookstores where they just smell good, they look good.
Yes.
You just want to spend hours in there and walk around.
Yes.
So she went off kind of on her thing. I'm walking around, and I come to this table, and I look down, and there's 2 books there. One was The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Oh, yes.
And I listened to his podcast too. And I said, oh gosh, I've heard of this book. I'm going to go ahead and buy it. And I hardly ever buy books to read. And next to it, and again, I know this one was mentioned by someone else recently on your podcast, but it's amazing how many times this book has actually come up in the last couple of months for me. But it's the Let Them Theory,
yes,
by Mel Robbins. I actually had somebody that I was in a meeting with not too long ago that said the words just in conversation, let them. And I asked a question, and it turns out they were reading the book too. And my wife actually started reading it recently, and we rarely ever find books that we actually both like to read.
Yeah.
So those are 2.
Those are great recommendations.
Yeah, those are
I bought
really
Let
books.
Them for my daughter, and I keep meaning to go back and get one for myself. Yeah.
Yeah, she I think Miss Robbins did has a YouTube podcast. Not YouTube.
She has a podcast.
What's the word I'm looking for? The TED Talk.
Right.
Yeah, I think. But so I haven't seen that one yet. But so those 2 books are there.
Those are good.
I've really enjoyed those.
Those are both great recommendations. So where do you get your inspiration? Who's inspiring you today?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, just a few months ago, we moved to Chattanooga from Northwest Florida. And some of the reasons for that were various, but it's just amazing sometimes how things happen in your life. You never know where you're going to be taken. And that's like, for example, what happened to me when I won that scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
That has impacted my entire life. The fact that my detachment commander recommended to me that I do that has made so much of a difference. So what inspires me is, the first one is rather simple, but I work from home, and so my office/bedroom faces my backyard. So every day when I'm sitting there working, and it's not a distraction, it's really an addition, I see beautiful green, and I see trees, and I see birds. And my wife set up this bird feeder, and she's got the app where she can listen to all the different birds and tell what they are. At one point, she had like 20 of them or something that were chirping away. But and there's a hawk that comes by usually once or twice a week, and so it's the inspiration of being aware of everything that's going on around us, and that kind of leads to the second part of inspiration. And it's really a book and a quote. Let me make sure I get this right. There's a fellow named Ryan Holiday who has a podcast again, and written a lot of great books, but it's kind of around Stoicism and the old ancient philosophers. And so one book that I have that I do my best to read every day is Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. Mm. And it's actually where he's written to himself on a daily basis. He's talking to himself about life and how he interacts with the world and other people interact with the world. And that's really been an inspiration. Before I get to the quote, one other thing is, a couple of Christmases ago, one of my daughters gave me a daily gratitude journal. And so I have that right where meditations is. So I try to, in the morning when I come in up after my walks, to sit down and write what I'm grateful for that day. And then I always tend to kind of go back and want to read a couple of days back, even the week, and I go, oh, yes, I remember. Yes, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. So I'm inspired by those things as well. It's just the combination of journaling and writing and reading other people's thoughts and meditations and Ryan's quote when he talked about Stoicism is that Stoics don't control the world, but they always control how they respond to the world.
Oh, that's great.
And so it's the same kind of thing when people in divorce, how you respond to something matters.
It does.
It really matters.
Absolutely.
So,
well, thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, before we go, I want to make sure our listeners know how they can reach you, your social media, your website, how they can find you if they're going to be needing any sort of financial analysis, if they're in the military, they need your expertise. Where do we get you?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. They've got a couple different ways of doing it. They can literally call me. I mean, I'm local, obviously, here in Chattanooga, but 423-305-6185 is my office number. Again, 423-305-6185. My website, which is the way most people find me, a lot of people find me, just on an internet search, is my business name. It's sandoakdivorcesolutions.com. I know that's a long one, but the sand and the oak, it's like folks are starting this process kind of in the sand. It's a difficult journey. It's not level. It's hard for them to kind of trudge through it. The oak is helping to move them to in the future of a foundation where the roots are deep and they're strong and they're able to withstand some things. So they actually can go to that website and request getting on my calendar and setting up a free consultation with me if they like. I'm on LinkedIn. If you just put in David Smith CDFA and you'll find me. I also have Facebook.com under my business name, Sandoak Divorce Solutions. I usually I try to post a blog or so about once a month at least. But I'm happy to answer questions for folks, like I said, and I really appreciate you allowing me to be here today. I appreciate all the work that you're doing and the information that you're sharing around the world with your podcast. It's really I really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you so much, and I love the thoughtfulness you put into your business name. That's wonderful. And I am so appreciative of you being here. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen a lot of women just asking about military divorce. It's so complex, and you really helped clarify some of the information and most importantly, where to start and some of the things that we need to be thinking about. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. I know we covered a lot. And there's a lot there, but I'm hoping that, like your other podcast, folks go back and re-listen and they share with someone else, that they feel needs this information. And lastly, just to close, I had someone reach out to me recently that heard a podcast I did. I think it was back in 23. Matter of fact, it was how you and I got introduced.
Oh.
Another podcast, he actually heard me talk about military divorce there, and he reached out to me, and we've talked in the last few days.
That's great. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
Right.
But thank you again.
Thank you. Please join me on the next episode of the Silver Divorce Podcast. I also ask you to do me a favor and please follow this show and share it with people you know who are going through divorce. I'd love to hear from you at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. Whether you are considering divorce or maybe you're newly in the divorce process, we'll help you on your journey and tell you things your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce, it's just one event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.